The paragraph subject. Every paragraph should have a clearly defined idea to the development of which each sentence contributes. The idea must not be too broad for the brief treatment of the subject by the paragraph. This is easily managed, since any idea may be narrowed down by imposing upon it successive conditions and limitations of time, place, point of view, etc. This is one strategy for developing a theme for your paragraph. Here's an example. First, you determine the general subject you are writing about. The broad statement of a general idea without limitation is the general subject. Next, you narrow down that general subject according to the purpose of your writing and who you're writing to. You can narrow it down by point of view, by place, by time, and by select circumstance. Once you do that, you've created a theme for your paragraph. In this example, our general subject without limitations is the study of Spanish. We will limit it to a single point of view, and in this circumstance we mean looking at the studying of Spanish from one aspect. In this case, we choose applications of studying Spanish. Next, we'll limit it as to place, application of studying Spanish by American students. We've limited it to America. Next, we'll limit it as to time, applications of studying Spanish by American students who plan to teach school. That's a future tense. And next, and finally, we'll limit it by circumstance to an available theme, applications of studying Spanish by American students who plan to teach school, and it's increasing their chances of future employment as school teachers. Now, this is a bulky composition, but it's something that will guide your writing and allow you to stick to a point. Another example, using the study of Spanish again, we'll limit it again by place, and we'll limit it to American students, application of studying Spanish by American students. Now we'll limit it as to time, applications of studying Spanish by American high school students who plan to travel to Spain for college. And finally, by circumstance, application of studying Spanish by American high school students who plan to travel to Spain for college, in helping them excel in a foreign country's college curriculum or environment. That's our final theme. Here's another one using the government. We'll limit the government to a single point of view, the federal government. Of course, you could say state government, local government, city government, county government. Now we'll limit it as to place. The federal government should be separate from Washington, D.C. And by this we mean the citizens of Washington, D.C. Further, we'll limit it as to time. The federal government should be separate from Washington, D.C. in modern times. We could have just as easily said the federal government should not be separate from Washington, D.C. in modern times. And then we'll limit it by circumstance to an available theme. The federal government should be separate from the government of Washington, D.C. in modern times because the citizens of Washington, D.C. are federalized and lose the benefits and protections, let's say, of states' rights. In this case, we're going to look at a general subject of traveling. So we're going to limit this subject to a single point of view, traveling by air. You could have just as easily said traveling by land or sea, by car. Now we'll limit it as to place, traveling abroad by air versus domestic traveling. Now we'll limit it further as to time, traveling abroad by air versus domestic travel in the 21st century. So traveling abroad versus domestic travel in the 21st century. And finally, by circumstance, traveling abroad by air versus domestic travel in the 21st century as a foreigner versus as a U.S. citizen. In this case, our general subject is poetry. We're going to limit it to a single point of view, African poetry. We'll limit it further as to place, African poetry in Nigeria. We'll limit it as to time, African poetry in colonial Nigeria. And then I tagged on versus modern times. and then by circumstance to an available theme. African poetry in colonial Nigeria against the colonizers versus African poetry in modern times by activists against multinational oil companies and their pollution. And finally, here's peace as a general subject. It's a broad topic, broad statement, and we're going to limit it to a single point of view: peace movements. And then place peace movements in America. As to time, peace movements in 19th century America. And finally, by circumstance, peace movements in 19th century America by abolitionists that led to the abolishment of slavery. These are some of the topics you can practice on in creating simple themes for your paragraph. We covered the first 5. This presentation was adapted from Paragraph Writing, A Rhetoric for Colleges by Fred Newton Scott, and Progressive Exercises in English Composition by R.G. Parker. Thank you for watching.